Absolutely. Here's section 1 written as full prose with a minimum of 700 words, expanding on the emotional and narrative weight of the title. Hashtag section 1. The fall of the first worlds. For every world we lost, 10 rose in defiance, but first came the losing. It began with static. Far beyond the settled core systems, nestled on the frontier of the Orion expansion zone, the colony of Karthus went dark. No warning. No distress signal. One day it was a bustling colony of 90,000 engineers, miners, and their families. The next it was gone. Off the charts, unreachable, as if it had never existed. UHA command chalked it up to a solar storm. Communication disruption. They'd seen it before. Then came Yalindra Prime. Same silence. Same excuses. Then, 2 more in the next week. By the time Earth realized something unnatural was happening, 7 entire colonies had vanished. Trade vessels rerouted. Patrol ships dispatched. But none returned. Each scouting party, no matter how heavily armed, simply disappeared into the void. Whispers spread across the interstellar networks.
Pirates, some said.
Civil war.
Plague.
Even machine rebellion. But those were just the minds of frightened people reaching for familiar horrors. The truth was worse. It arrived in the form of a drifting escape pod, recovered by a merchant hauler near Sirius Delta. Inside was a boy, 8 years old, burned, half frozen, barely alive. His vitals were weak, but his mind was stronger than any medical team expected. When asked what happened, he said only one word before falling into a coma. Karnathi. The Karnathi were a ghost from the galactic past. An ancient empire, once rumored to have ruled large swaths of the spiral arms tens of thousands of years ago, thought extinct or reclusive. Humanity had encountered fragments of their technology in derelict ruins, always long abandoned, always inactive. No Karnathi diplomat had ever stepped into human territory. No formal contact, no aggression, no warning. But now they had returned, and they had decided humanity's expansion was over. In the following months, the attacks accelerated. No declarations. No demands. Only death. Worlds fell like dominoes under a hand too fast to follow. Some were annihilated from orbit in precise surgical strikes that turned cities into glowing glass. Others were subjected to chemical scouring or atmosphere denaturation, leaving their surfaces intact, but lifeless. Survivors were rare. Refugees, rarer. One woman, rescued from the ruin of Kessin Prime, told of skies set ablaze by beams of colorless fire. She'd watched her daughter dissolve in her arms as the air itself became poison. They didn't speak, she said. They didn't land. They didn't even see us. We were ants. They stepped on us and kept walking. The United Human Alliance, comprising Earth's core governments, Mars-domed republics, Titan's AI-augmented communes, and the orbital free fleets, mobilized as best it could. But it was too little, too late. The frontier had never been well defended. Why would it be? Humanity had not known war since the Solar Unification Accords 2 centuries earlier. What fleets they had were fragmented, scattered between colony defense and scientific research. Shipyards had long favored exploration vessels over battleships. Humanity's arrogance had assumed peace among the stars. In less than 5 standard years, over 120 human worlds were gone, not just settlements, but entire cultures, languages,
art,
biodiversity curated over generations, entire planetary ecosystems, engineered over decades, reduced to cinders. The economic core was strained. Food imports failed. Terraformers on newer colonies froze. Trade networks collapsed. Billions died. More were displaced, flooding the remaining worlds in tides of grief and desperation. But death wasn't the worst part. The worst was how precise the Karnathi were. They chose the youngest colonies first, the ones full of children, dreamers, fresh soil, and hope. Then they targeted logistical hubs, cutting the UHA's ability to respond. It wasn't war. It was extermination. A silent, calculated purge of a rising rival species. Earth itself braced for invasion. The skies over the blue planet turned gray, with shipyards expanding at a feverish pace. Volunteers flooded recruitment centers. Artificial intelligences were reprogrammed for war. The old factions, long separated by ideology, unified in terror. It wasn't unity out of hope. It was unity out of necessity. Still, even in despair, something ancient began to stir in humanity's marrow. Something buried deep in Earth's long history of war and survival. Humanity had always been adaptable, but it had also always been dangerous when cornered. For every transmission that ended in screams, another began in vengeance. For every world burned, 100 swore revenge. The first of the resistance broadcasts came from Far Reach Station, thought destroyed in the second wave. It had gone dark for 8 years, until it blinked back to life, defying its own funeral records. A single voice rang through the void, rebroadcast across 1,000 relays, in every language used by humankind. They took our world. They'll never take our will. For every world we've lost, 10 will rise in defiance. It was a cry of rage, a call to arms, a promise, and it was only the beginning. Let me know when you're ready for Section 2, and I'll continue the saga. Absolutely. Here is Section 2, written as a full prose narrative with a minimum of 700 words, continuing the saga of humanity's defiance. Hashtag Section 2, the spark of resistance. Asterisk, they took our world. They'll never take our will. Asterisk. The words of the Far Reach Station broadcast echoed like a pulse through the void, haunting, defiant, and unmistakably human. For many, it was the first sign that hope wasn't dead, only buried beneath the rubble of lost worlds. What followed was not the orderly mobilization of a standing military, nor the polished declarations of a government's war council. What followed was chaos. Asterisk, purposeful chaos. Asterisk. The United Human Alliance, stretched thin and overwhelmed, tried to impose order. Earth's high command called for defensive posturing and slow, methodical rebuilding of what remained. But the people in the colonies, the survivors, the refugees, the outlaws, the miners, they weren't interested in waiting. They couldn't. They had lost too much. From that desperation and fury was born the Tenfold Accord. It started with a stolen freighter near the Ganymede Belt. The Antares Whisper, a cargo ship thought destroyed in the early waves, resurfaced with a vengeance. Its crew, mostly ex-miners and smugglers, had retrofitted it with salvaged weapons, reinforced hull plating, and jury-rigged fusion thrusters. It intercepted a Karnathi scout ship near a dead star and rammed it at relativistic speed, obliterating both vessels in a blaze of nuclear fire. No survivors. No heroes. Just vengeance. They became the first unofficial martyrs of a Tenfold Accord. Soon after, resistance cells began popping up in every system, coordinated through encrypted burst transmissions and ghost satellites that danced across gravitational shadows. Some were organized militias with stolen weapons and converted colony ships. Others were just angry civilians with old rifles, plasma torches, and nothing left to lose. Each cell operated under a single principle. For every world the Karnathi destroyed, humans would rise and strike back tenfold, 10 acts of sabotage, of justice, of resistance. Not just military attacks, but anything that kept human culture alive and defiant. On Alera V, a world known for its vast farming valleys and agri-tech, survivors refused evacuation. Instead, they turned farming drones into weaponized swarms. Soil tillers were repurposed into underground drills that carved ambush tunnels beneath Karnathi landing zones. Children acted as runners, supplying fighters with ammunition and relaying messages through ancient Morse code, undetectable by Karnathi AI. The first time the Karnathi landed there, expecting to raise another defenseless colony, they encountered a hellscape of improvised traps and chemical explosives. Over 600 Karnathi were killed in one day. The resistance lost more, but the message was clear. This world would not fall quietly. Meanwhile, in the dense asteroid field known as the Vorex Shards, a flotilla of civilian ships gathered to form a mobile resistance base. Exiled engineers, cybernetic smugglers, and even rogue AIs worked together in the shadows to develop countermeasures to Karnathi tech. Using fragmentary data from fallen Karnathi ships, they created the first prototype of the Black Net, an adaptive digital virus that could blind enemy sensors for precious seconds during an assault. In a war of milliseconds, those seconds were lethal. Elsewhere, archivists and cultural preservationists took up a different kind of fight. They feared that the Karnathi weren't just erasing life, they were erasing memory. So they began encoding human art, literature, and history into quantum data crystals and scattering them across space. These memory beacons were hidden inside comets, buried beneath abandoned colonies, or uploaded into deep space anomalies. The goal wasn't just survival, it was continuity, so that even if humanity died, its story would not. The Tenfold Accord wasn't a government. It wasn't even a military. It was an idea. And that made it dangerous. By the 10th year of the war, the Accord had grown into a decentralized but highly adaptive network. They shared data, tactics, weapons. Some factions clashed ideologically, some leaned toward brutal retaliation, others focused on humanitarian rescue and recovery, but they remained united under one truth. Humanity would not go quietly. In the wreckage of the colony Ardent Reach, resistance fighters discovered a working Karnathi AI core. Rather than destroy it, a team of cybernetic engineers linked their minds through an ancient neural mesh and infiltrated its code. What they found confirmed their worst fears. The Karnathi viewed humans as a biological instability, a species too erratic, too adaptive, and too dangerous to be left unchecked. Ironically, it was this very trait, this chaotic potential, that was now turning the tide. The Resistance had no fleet, yet they brought down destroyers. They had no formal military, yet coordinated strikes across star systems. They had no central leader, yet carried the same message in every corner of space. You will not erase us. We are the fire between the stars. And slowly, the Karnathi began to stumble. Supply lines grew vulnerable. Patrol ships vanished in ambushes. Colonies once marked for extermination now bristled with planetary shields and magnetic rail defenses. The enemy had not expected a long war. Their ancient doctrine had predicted a swift purge. They had never encountered a species so capable of fighting back with sticks, stones, code, and sacrifice. The turning point hadn't come from Earth. It hadn't come from the UHA's admirals or politicians. It had come from the broken, the burned, and the forgotten, those who had nothing left to lose but their spirit. They had risen not once, but again and again, fueled by memory, vengeance, and a fire no extinction beam could extinguish. Humanity had become something else. Asterisk, asterisk, not just a species, but a storm asterisk, asterisk. And the Karnathi, for the first time in eons, began to fear. The Tenfold Accord had done more than survive. It had become a movement, a myth, a war cry carried by the stars. Let me know when you're ready for Section 3, Tenfold Retaliation, and I'll continue the saga with another 700+ words.
Certainly.
Here's Section 3, Tenfold Retaliation, written in full prose with a minimum of 700 words, continuing the saga of Defiance. Hashtag Section 3, Tenfold Retaliation. Asterisk. We don't need to match them. We only need to make them bleed. Asterisk. The first real victory didn't come from Earth. It came from the edge of known space, an empty stretch of blackness called the Helion Rift, where stars hung distant and weak like dying embers. Once a deep space mining zone, long abandoned and thought tactically worthless, it became the graveyard of a Karnathi war fleet. By then, the Tenfold Accord had grown into something formidable. No longer just scattered resistance cells, it had evolved into a federation of war clans, survivor colonies, and rogue military units that answered to no planetary authority but held a single unifying creed: retribution. The plan to strike Helion was audacious. The Accord lured a Karnathi incursion fleet, 3 dreadnoughts and 6 escort vessels, into the rift using falsified distress signals and a strategically abandoned habitat station, leaking radiation to mimic life signs. What the Karnathi didn't know was that over 400 mining platforms, buried beneath asteroid surfaces and dormant for years, had been reprogrammed by human engineers into a makeshift kill grid. Each platform had been fitted with solar-charged mass drivers, laser lances, and magnetoplasma coils powered by gutted freighter cores. On a synchronized signal, every cannon fired at once, turning the entire rift into a crucible of energy and kinetic death. 2 Karnathi capital ships were destroyed outright. A third tried to flee but was crippled and later boarded by exocided human strike teams. It was the first Karnathi vessel ever captured intact. From its remains came priceless data, tech blueprints, language constructs, energy frequencies, and, most importantly, insight into the Karnathi command architecture. They were not as monolithic as previously believed. Factions existed within their hierarchy, some more dogmatic than others. And some, it turned out, feared humanity's unpredictability more than they let on. Using this knowledge, the Tenfold Accord launched a new strategy: asymmetrical total war. They didn't need to conquer Karnathi worlds. They only needed to make their war machine bleed. Everywhere, all the time. Strike flotillas roamed through Karnathi-controlled space, hitting communications relays, ambushing fuel refineries, disrupting logistics networks. Fleets began operating without bases, using mobile asteroid habitats and cloaked docking bays built into dead moons. Human warships were no longer just military vessels. They were cities of vengeance, floating across the stars. Each new class of warship was named after a fallen world. Karthus Ascendant. Gylindra's Fury. Kessen's Oath. Ilera Tenfold. And then there was the Whisper Reborn, a dreadnought forged from the salvaged bones of 5 destroyed ships and powered by a prototype core that pulsed with blue fire. It became a legend, appearing out of nowhere to decimate Karnathi formations before vanishing into black space. The United Human Alliance, once hesitant and slow, now found itself following the Accord's lead. Reverse-engineered Karnathi tech gave birth to phase mirror shields, which bent light and radiation to deflect energy weapons. Fusion-born gravitic shells pierced even the thickest Karnathi hulls. Human soldiers, augmented with neural reflex enhancers and adaptive nanofields, became nightmares in close-quarters boarding operations. And still, the Accord pushed further. Their engineers developed bio-cloaked relay spores, living satellites that latched onto enemy vessels and transmitted telemetry back to human command. They infected Karnathi databanks with virus strains disguised as ancient religious scripts, causing systemic hallucinations in enemy AIs. Even Earth changed. No longer the soft capital of a tired civilization, it became a black-armored bastion world. Massive orbital shipyards ringed it like iron halos. Every continent pulsed with military factories, fusion forges, and grav train networks hauling raw material from the Moon and Mars. Cities became bunkers. Civilian life merged with war effort. Children grew up learning both mathematics and sabotage techniques. Art began to reflect pain and vengeance. No one forgot the first years. The world's lost. The screams. The silence. And across all Tenfold Aligned systems, that memory was institutionalized. Each act of retaliation carried a name, not an operation code, but the name of someone lost. An orphan, a mother, a poet, a librarian. The resistance ensured the enemy would know this war wasn't impersonal. In response, the Karnathi changed their strategy. They pulled back from the frontier. Their patrols grew cautious. Intercepted transmissions revealed a phrase entering Karnathi discourse. *, the humans are becoming what they were meant to be. *, what did that mean? Theories varied. Some believed the Karnathi saw humanity as a self-correcting predator, a race that sharpened itself on the grindstone of loss. Others thought it was fear. Raw, ancient fear. Because the truth was no longer deniable. Humanity was not just surviving. It was learning,
adapting,
rising. ***. At the war's outset, humans had begged for mercy, clung to diplomacy, tried to reason. But that humanity was gone. What rose from the ashes was something fierce, something furious, and most of all, focused ***. And the Karnathi had not prepared for that. One intercepted Karnathi log said it best. We sought to contain them before they became a threat. But now we face a storm that cannot be contained. Every colony we destroyed forged a weapon. Every city we burned gave birth to soldiers. The humans are no longer just flesh and bone. They are memory. They are vengeance. They are becoming inevitable. The Tenfold Accord had shifted the war's momentum. And now, humanity wasn't fighting for survival. It was fighting to end the war. On its own terms. Let me know when you're ready for Section 4. The Rise of 10, and I'll conclude the story with another 700-plus word section.
Certainly.
Here's Section 4. The Rise of 10, written in full narrative prose with a minimum of 700 words, bringing the saga to its powerful conclusion. Hashtag Section 4. The Rise of 10. We rose, not once, but tenfold. There was no single moment when the war ended. No grand surrender. No planet-shaking explosion to mark its final hour. The war, like an old fire, simply burned down, too slow for celebration, too heavy for relief. But when the embers cooled, the galaxy had changed forever. The Karnathi Dominion, once thought invincible, fractured from within. The pressure of endless human retaliation, the unrelenting attrition of their fleets, and the spread of dissent among their own kind unraveled their once absolute unity. First, smaller factions ceased communication with the central command. Then border worlds refused further conscription. Then, finally, a major fleet, under Admiral Vexenthal, surrendered to the Tenfold Accord unconditionally. It wasn't mercy they sought. It was survival. The Accord didn't respond with retribution. Not yet. Instead, they offered terms: stand down, disband, and witness. The Karnathi would no longer be hunted, but neither would they be permitted to rebuild. The final war council convened in orbit above the shattered remains of Katrevax, the Karnathi ancestral homeworld, now a ruin pockmarked by its own failing gravity wells, torn apart by internal rebellion and orbital bombardment. Representatives from Earth, Mars, the Jovian Free States, and all 10 Accord corps met aboard the flagship Karthus Ascendant to determine what would follow victory. There were calls for extermination. There were calls for occupation. But in the end, the decision was neither. Humanity had seen what happened to species that fed too long on vengeance. The Karnathi had tried to erase humans from existence, and failed. Now humanity would do what they could not: end the cycle. Instead of replacing the Karnathi, they redefined the galaxy. At the center of this new age were the tenfold worlds, 10 planet-states, each forged from the ashes of destruction and named in memory of what was lost. These were not colonies, they were monuments, living testaments to human endurance, and each one designed with a specific purpose in the new interstellar order. New Yalindra became the cultural heart, a sanctuary for art, language, and history. Alera 10 served as the agricultural keystone, terraformed with hybrid ecosystems from dozens of extinct worlds. Karthus Ascendant, now a planet-sized forge world, became the military and technological backbone of the Accord. Farreach Nova housed the Hall of Flame, a place where the names of every lost soul, every burned world, and every act of resistance were etched in living stone. Each world stood not as a symbol of conquest, but of survival. And together, they formed the new core of human civilization. But peace did not come easily. There were still fires to put out: rogue Karnathi factions, radical Accord splinters, warlords who refused to stop fighting. Yet, unlike in the early days of the war, the Accord had structure. It had reach. And most importantly, it had unity. The scattered threads of humanity, once fragile and divided, had been forged together by shared memory. This was a peace that bled. And humanity remembered that. On every tenfold world, the fallen were not just mourned, they were taught. In classrooms, children memorized the names of the 127 lost colonies. They studied resistance tactics alongside literature. History was not sanitized, it was engraved. Statues of the nameless dead stood beside monuments to famous generals. Every city bore scars on purpose. Fragments of ships, charred debris, melted hulls, kept intact as a reminder of the price of forgetting. But not all legacies were somber. The Accord opened a universal archive, an interstellar library encoded in quantum lattice work, containing every surviving record of human art, music, science, and philosophy. They called it the Flame Eternal. From its servers, the galaxies sang again. Songs from drowned continents. Paintings recreated from children's dreams. Star maps written in the dialects of extinct cultures. Humanity, despite everything, had not only preserved its story, it had expanded it. What once had been scattered now radiated from the tenfold worlds in every direction. In time, other species took notice. The Karnathi, diminished and quiet, became students of human history. Other races, once indifferent to Earth, now sought alliance, not out of fear, but out of respect. Because they saw something in the humans that defied categorization. Not dominance. Not cruelty. Defiance. A defiance that could burn cities or build them. That could destroy, but also remember. That would bury the dead and still find the strength to rise again. In the orbit of Earth, now regreened and crowned in steel, a final broadcast was transmitted across all tenfold systems and deep into Karnathi space. Spoken by no leader. Delivered by no AI. Just a voice, calm, old, tired, but unshaken. Asterisk, you took our skies. You stole our children. You burned our dreams. But you forgot one truth. Asterisk. Asterisk, we are human.
We do not break.
We multiply. Asterisk. Asterisk, for every world we lost, 10 rose in defiance. And now, 1,000 more wait to follow. Asterisk. Asterisk, we are not done. We are never done. Asterisk. And in the centuries that followed, the phrase became more than a slogan. It became a creed, etched into every military badge, whispered at every funeral, and engraved above the entrances of schools, spaceports, and cathedrals. Tenfold, we rise. And humanity did. Not because they were the strongest, not because they were the smartest, but because they refused to stay fallen. Would you like the entire 2,800-word saga compiled as a single complete story in one document? I can format it for print, narration, or posting. Just let me know your goal.